Hi, and welcome to the latest program for Attending the Garden. We're thrilled today to have Graycen Wheeler to talk to us about water issues in Oklahoma. Graycen, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, so my name's Grayson. I'm a reporter at KOSU Public Radio, which is one of Oklahoma's NPR member stations. So I cover water issues statewide, which has been a really, really enlightening job. I've learned a lot. I'm from Oklahoma. Um, I'm originally from Norman, and then I lived in Colorado and California for a while for school. And so it was really interesting when I applied for this job to be like, oh, I don't really think that we have water issues in Oklahoma the way that we do in these other places I've been living. And that is not the case. We do have lots of different water things going on. I just think we have a little bit less reporting dedicated to them. KOSU decided to hire a water reporter because they did a lot of our executive director did a lot of outreach and asked people what they had most questions about. And a lot of people, I think especially in rural areas that have fewer news sources covering them, they have a lot of questions about their water because people aren't watchdogging it. And so they decided to hire somebody. Or
That's
sorry, I missed
interesting.
that.
That's interesting that it is on people's radar. So that's kind of encouraging, honestly, to me, because I feel like I was telling you before that this was really top on my list of topics that I wanted to cover because I really feel like I think this is the most pressing issue that we face. I mean, and all of the different work that we do and the areas that we're doing all of this action around. I can be very dark, and often will say none of this will matter if we don't have clean water to drink.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah, I think it's easy to take for granted because so most of us don't have to deal with not having clean water to drink very often. Yeah.
Absolutely. We just become accustomed to just having this just abundance of clean water all the time, even when it's not necessary for something like our toilets or whatever. And that's a finite resource. I mean, maybe you'll tell me it's not a finite, maybe it's not a finite resource, but and then I do periodically see things obviously we're more aware of water issues in a place like California and the West, where they have these issues with wildfires. So many things are being threatened because of that particular issue. But then I do occasionally see a headline that this reservoir that supplies Oklahoma will be depleted in the next. I can't remember what the figure is.
Mhm.
Or that I was just looking up that 75% of rivers in Oklahoma are too polluted to swim in or something like that. And so
Mhm.
you see these things kind of pop up, but nobody's really talking about them, or there's just all these other huge issues that are taking precedence over it. And I just keep coming back to, water's life. We cannot
Mhm.
exist without access to water, and we just sort of treat it like it's this. And just a little, so we can start with you kind of telling us about some of the things that you've uncovered in your reporting and some of the main issues that we do have in Oklahoma. And
Mhm.
then I'm going to tack on one of my little eco
Mhm.
charts at the end to talk about a little bit of personal water conservation and how we can all help with this ourselves. So um,
Yeah, sounds good. And I think I kind of am focused. I feel like I basically ran with one thing in my presentation, which are forever chemicals, because I have been thinking about them
oh,
a
yay.
lot since I first reported, since I first started learning about them. Um, and so I wanted to talk about them here, because I think that like sort of what you were talking about water being a finite resource. I don't tend to think of it that way necessarily because it goes in a cycle. We treat it, we introduce problems to it, and lots of times we're introducing pollutants to it, more than we're removing them from it, but we are, when we treat water for drinking, removing pollutants from it sort of all the time, and we're pretty good at some of them. But the problem with forever chemicals is that they're very hard to remove. So water that's not tainted by those is a pretty finite resource at this point. I was born in Norman. I grew up there. I went to college there. And then I went, if I have my arrows, I don't have my arrows. I moved to Boulder where I have my PhD in biochemistry. But while I was there, I was doing a lot of like science blogging and science news podcasting, and just thought it was the bee's knees and sort of dreaded the day that would come where I got a real biochemistry job and like wasn't allowed to do that anymore. So instead of continuing to dread that, I went and did a really quick like program for scientists who want to become journalists, and got some journalism experience in California. And then I got to move back home-ish to Oklahoma City, where I work for KOSU, which is a real treat and lets me use a lot of like my excitement about science, but also do a lot of the journalism stuff that's lovely too. Basically, I've been thinking about PFAS a lot, which are those forever chemicals. The letters in PFAS stand for per/poly fluoroalkyl substances. And what that means basically is that they have a carbon in there and they have a fluorine in there, and there's a bond between them. This is a super strong chemical bond, due to like some kind of complex physics stuff, but it's a very, very, very strong bond, which is why we like these forever chemicals, because they have this really hard to break bond. They don't react with very many things, including like water. So they make things waterproof because water can't soak into them. They make things fireproof because this doesn't burn, because burning is a chemical reaction, right? It gives them all kinds of like useful properties, but it also makes it so that they don't break down when you're done with them. So they just kind of lurk around in the environment, and the more we make, the more pile up in our environment because there's not really much of a cycle of them leaving at all. And the thing that I think is important to note is that when I first started learning about these, I was like, great, so they have one of these bonds in them. Like they have this one hard to break bond, but they're like crawling with them. So these are, I feel like I did start this off with like my most boring technical slides, but like each of these are like some of the most common of these forever chemicals. And they have like, a dozen or more of these really strong bonds in them. So they're just like, they're hardy chemicals. They lurk in the environment, and particularly of particular relevance, I guess, to me, but I think also to us, all of us who love to drink water. They lurk around in our water a lot. And yeah, so they're around. The reason this is troubling, we don't understand exactly their health implications. We don't fully understand them, right? And by we, I mean researchers, experts, and like us who are reading what they found. But some of the things we do know, are that they can cause different types of cancer. A lot of where they've seen that happen is in people like firefighters and military personnel who are dealing with fire suppressant foam a lot, because the fire suppressant foam that they use is like extremely PFAS heavy. So they're interacting with these really high amounts of it pretty frequently. But there's also evidence that it can cause things like high cholesterol, differences in the way people respond to vaccines, some developmental problems, and just like in thyroid issues, as well as different types of cancer. And a lot of these are in people who people who are exposed to pretty high levels of PFAS. There's not been a ton of research on like me as a regular person who drinks water that has really low amounts of PFAS in it, maybe. And if I do that for the rest of my life, what will happen to me? I don't know. Because that's very finicky stuff to study. But yeah, so people are troubled about this because there are health implications we're seeing, and we don't totally know the extent of them. Um, but also just because like these substances are, well, while we figure it out, these substances are sort of piling up in our environment.
Um, where are these, like, where are we encountering these, like, as an everyday person?
As an everyday person, so that is my next slide.
Oh, okay.
I'll go to it. Basically, as an everyday person, we are encountering them in a lot of consumer products. I think most people know, or like, I think the thing that most people have maybe read about, is like nonstick pans, are a particularly, like Teflon is a PFAS chemical. Um, so it's one of the oldest ones. But it's in all kinds of stuff. If you have like a waterproof thing, there's a good chance that it has PFAS in it, right? Like not like waxed canvas or things that are made out of like more naturally like old school waterproofing, but lots of like kind of plasticky raincoats, but also things like water resistant sunscreen, things like nail polish that go on and don't come off, things like waterproof eye makeup and other makeup, things like waterproof paper straws, which is a bummer, right? I think those tend to be sort of, we think of them as, they do have a lot of environmental benefits compared to plastic straws, but they also have their own hangups, right? Um, yeah, lots of food containers that need to be, that are made out of paper but need to be like waterproof and hardy. Lots of performance fabrics. So I think about this when I sit on my couch, and especially when I like spill something on my couch. My couch is waterproof, because it has PFAS in it. And
Mm.
those are, it's tricky because there's no requirement to label them in anything. You can generally like look at ingredients on makeup, and look for something that has that fluoro in it and be like, that might be a PFAS. I'll like look that up. But it's really hard to sort of identify. Like, I guess I don't totally know that my couch has PFAS, but I sort of assume that it does because it's waterproof synthetic material. So I don't know. So we're encountering them sort of all over. I think that that is the big interesting thing here, and sort of why I ended up running with this as my PowerPoint topic, is that people hear about this. It's like a very buzzy term, the forever chemicals, but like they're around. We're using them. We're enjoying their benefits all the time. And I think it's important to be aware of that. It's really become something that I am like crazy aware of since learning about this for the first time last year-ish. It's just, I don't know, important to be aware of so that we can sort of weigh how important that is. Like, how important is it that my mascara is waterproof? It's not that important, so I have switched to like a clean mascara that is less likely to introduce, forever chemicals that will stay in the environment forever. How important is it that my couch is waterproof? I don't know. Like that would be a hard decision if I were to need a new couch. So I just think it's important to realize that these are in a lot of the products that we use and enjoy. They introduce a lot of like modern convenience. And I don't know, it's just an important thing to sort of be weighing when you purchase things. Because the thing with a lot of these are in like personal products, shampoos, like I mentioned, makeup, um, also cleaning products. And so when we like throw them away, or when we take a shower, they go down the drain into our wastewater. Um, and then our wastewater gets treated. They take out a lot of pollutants, but not forever chemicals because we don't really have a good way to remove them. And so then those end up in our environment, and eventually environmental water becomes our drinking water again. We add more PFAS to it, So it's kind of a concentration cycle where like we are we specifically are like cycling this water and adding more forever chemicals into it every time. Um, Manufacturing also introduces a lot of forever chemicals. So there's been some pretty high profile lawsuits against 3M and DuPont. 3M in particular makes Scotchgard, right? Which
Mm.
is PFAS. Like that's how it does its Scotchgard thing. Um, and so that is also important to note. It's like one of those, it's that tricky like consumer, it's not really a paradox, but the thing of being like, like why should I have to do anything when, you know, companies are adding a lot more PFAS into the environment, but
Yes, I have that argument at least monthly in my house.
yeah, but just like I can have idealistic goals and believe that I can make a difference in a like larger scale way. And that might be true eventually. However, right now, um, I can, yeah, try to, you know, buy different mascara.
Right. Well,
So,
I do think that there is, and there have been examples in the past of collective action that has
mhm,
changed. And I mean, really, you're making your feelings known about this through your dollars. Like we are
mhm,
consumers and they are businesses. So the more people who are aware of this and are making different choices,
right. And I
that
think that that's the thing is we're still sort of in a situation where I think a lot of people are not aware of where these chemicals are coming from and necessarily how the role that they're playing in introducing them to the environment. And whenever I have talked with experts about this for stories, it's something that they all sort of emphasize that like, and not only in making these consumer choices are you minimizing environmental pollution, but you're also minimizing your own exposure to these chemicals that we know have health effects, but we don't really understand the extent of them. So it's also, you're getting a really personal benefit from it too, right? Um,
yeah, I
which is
think
not always the case with,
that's
yeah.
yeah, I think I think maybe a month or two ago there was a big study that was circulating that they found, was that the credit card sized? I can't remember. But
Oh, the
then
microplastics.
yeah, but then just this in the last couple of days I've seen the one circulating about like there's like a plastic spoon sized
In
in
your brain.
most people's brains.
Yeah, I think
So microplastics are different than
they're different. I think that it like a lot of the solutions are similar and a lot of the like ways to think about it is similar. It's a similar issue. And I think it's also often intertwined because it's all I guess I should have mentioned this at the top that like the thing about PFAS is that they do not really occur in nature. So in a similar way to plastics, they're something that we got really excited about in the first half of the 20th century because we were like, oh my gosh, this is going to change our life. And it did. And we got really dependent on the benefits and conveniences that they provide. And now we're sort of figuring out the costs of those. Um, but yes, so I think it ends up being like sort of a similar problem with, I think, sort of a similar answer on the consumer side, but they are separate things. So to like zoom in on Oklahoma, there are PFAS in some of our drinking waters. This is a USGS study from 2023 that did not test a ton of water supplies, but they did test, I think, 4 in Oklahoma, and identified PFAS in 2, one in a public water supply near Oklahoma City. As far as I can tell, I shouldn't say based on the location, this is just like from a tap, so it's not like at a water treatment plant. Best as I can tell, it's Nichols Hills, but I don't specifically know the location or like what public water supply that PFAS sample came from. And then they detected it in a private well in Potawatomi County. So this was kind of a smaller study, uh, but as part of the EPA, the EPA has been sort of developing rules about how many forever chemicals can be in drinking water. We have those in place now. They had a proposed rule about like uh, how much forever chemicals you could release into water as like an industrial facility. But those have been nixed recently. But anyway, as part of their developing regulations for drinking water, they do these kind of preliminary data collection situations where they called UCMRs, which is like unregulated contaminant monitoring rules, where they have water, like public water supplies, test for chemicals they're not regulating necessarily, so they can sort of see how much they're there and see like what might be an appropriate limit or like an appropriate and, you know, not unreasonable limit for PFAS or for any of these unregulated chemicals. But they included PFAS in this testing. And I don't know how well you can see it, but basically this visualization, and there would be, like, if we included dots that don't have detected PFAS, there would be a lot, just to be clear. Like, a lot of public water supplies did not detect them. But this is showing ones that did. So we have these dark blue ones that detected PFAS in people's drinking water, but below the proposed limit. And then there are these light blue ones that show where they found kind of higher levels of PFAS in drinking water supplies. And then there are also military sites which tend to have, which are just here so that you can sort of like compare what's around them, but they tend to use a lot of PFAS as fire suppressants. But yes, so just like we do have, this is something that's happening in Oklahoma. People are encountering PFAS, not just in their consumer products, but at this point we're encountering them in our water. A lot of us are, especially in kind of near our population centers. And some of us are encountering them at higher levels than might be ideal according to the EPA. There is something sort of an interesting problem with this, with regulating forever chemicals in drinking water, is that they're very hard to remove. I think a lot of, when I have talked with experts, there's this sort of concern that like the EPA can set a limit, but it's very, very hard to actually like make a meaningful change to the amount of PFAS in drinking water. And then also it's very hard to test for it because lots of lab equipment contains PFAS. So it's very easy to, yeah, it's sort of hard to get an accurate reading. And in fact, there's only one place in Oklahoma, it is this room, which is in Stillwater at Accurate Labs, that can test for PFAS. So in Oklahoma, it's pretty hard to get your, it's just hard to monitor, right? Like it's hard to make sure you're collecting samples well. It's hard to get them tested quickly because it all has to go to this one this one facility that has the capability to test for it. And that's a problem in places that aren't Oklahoma too. But yes, it's hard to measure. It's hard to remove. But you should be able to look that, like this data is publicly available and this visualization is from the Environmental Working Group. Like if people want to dig into it and like look up their drinking water provider, you could do that at this where this citation is. So yes, and so I've come back to this basically, which is that it is a lot easier to like it's not very easy to remove PFAS from water once they're in there. So it's sort of important to think about these arrows about how we're getting it into the water in the first place. That's basically Yeah. Um, and I think something that people have been really concerned about recently are these forever chemicals in biosolids. Are you familiar with biosolids as like
Um,
fertilizer?
yeah, so my partner is a biologist, and he was telling me that in states where they are testing soils, they have
Mhm.
found that there are just like huge swaths of farmland that are almost unusable now because they contain too many forever chemicals. And
Mhm.
that therefore now that sort of scared other states from doing widespread testing because they don't
Yeah,
want
you just,
they don't want to
yeah.
declare their farmland unusable. I
Right.
mean, it's yeah.
Right. Yeah, and that's because of like because we use this part of the PFAS cycle, the wastewater, right? As our wastewater treatment, when you put anything down a shower drain or a toilet or a storm drain, it goes to your local wastewater treatment facility, unless you have a septic tank, which is a different situation. But for many of us, it ends up at a wastewater treatment facility where they treat it. They remove as many pollutants as they can. They make sure it meets EPA standards, and they end up with treated effluent, they call it, that is safe. Like they measure it and make sure, but that they can discharge back into the environment. But they also end up with this sludge, which is, yeah, like treated also. It just piles up, right? Like because people are always using water. They're always putting things down their shower drains and their sinks and their toilets.
Because the sludge is human waste.
Well, the sludge is all sorts of waste, right? Like this is not just like it's also not untreated human waste. Like I think a lot of people think of this as just like they're spreading human poop on fields, which is not the case. Like this is when you take all of that wastewater in, which again is like it is human waste, but it's also food scraps that end up, down your sink and just like whatever. But it's treated also. So it like contains treated human waste for sure, but it's not like just poop. Um, but uh that accumulates, right? Because we're always putting stuff into our wastewater system. Um, and in the 90s, they came up with an idea for it that I think, knowing what we knew in the 90s, was probably a pretty good idea. um, or like seemed like a good idea at the time to use it as fertilizer because it contains a lot of the things that plants like to grow. And it helps wastewater treatment plants have a beneficial use for their sludge. But like you said, as we have been putting more and more PFAS down our drains, there ends up being a lot of PFAS in our wastewater and a lot of PFAS in our sludge. So it builds up. And I think, oh, this also didn't import my notes, but it's like a lot of the majority of Oklahoma's treated wastewater sludge ends up being used and ends up being land applied, like used as fertilizer. Um, there is a bill this legislative session that I think is really interesting that would um, put a moratorium on that until 2028. So we just take a little break. We like say, no, everybody stop doing this and we're not issuing any new permits to do this. Um, and the reason that I think this is really interesting is that basically like then what happens to the sludge? Because it's still full of PFAS and it doesn't just go away if you don't put it on the land. It basically, like
What did they
it,
do with it before the 90s?
I don't know. I don't know. They might have also been like the permitting process for using it as for land applying it came up in the 90s. But yeah, I don't know. I think you can put it in a landfill basically, but then it can leach into, like those have environmental implications as well. Um, so I don't know.
Yeah, because I know I live in Norman and we have a free compost
Hmm.
program. So I used to get compost from the city, and
Hmm.
they do like I've seen them out there with like the big like spraying the wastewater or whatever
Yeah.
term would be on there. And I this year I'm a gardener, so I'm growing vegetables and stuff. So I didn't um and I didn't put that on my like around specifically around my vegetables because you don't know what people have put in their yard waste or whatever. But
Hmm.
I did use it like on paths or other areas that weren't being where I wasn't planting stuff.
Hmm.
And I didn't do it this year because of this issue.
Yeah.
And so, does it actually, like, what is the impact when it's in your soil? Is that transferring to the plants or the food that you're growing? Or,
So I think my understanding is yes, that they can be incorporated into these chemicals can end up in plants that's grown on the soil. I think another thing is just that like if it's in your soil, it can leach into groundwater, it can run off into, stream water. It is just more available to end up in the environment. Um, yeah. But yes, the my understanding is that it can affect plants grown on fields that have biosolids used on them.
does that
Uh,
have an impact on like productivity or for farmers?
I don't know. I don't know. I would imagine that if it did, it would get kind of lost in the positive, like, because this is like good fertilizer, you know.
Well, that's what
Um,
like so for this bill. Like, if this bill passed, would that have would those farmers have to find some other form of fertilizer that also might not be great?
Probably. And it also would maybe be more expensive for them. But we do also, I like intentionally avoided it in this presentation. We've got a lot of chicken waste product as well that they're always looking for something to do with. So,
And the
um,
chicken waste is better.
it probably has fewer PFAS. Um, and the moral of the story is to sort of think about, sort of be aware and try to read about where PFAS might be, where you might be encountering them in your life, and sort of try to weigh where they're important, and weigh the benefits they give you with this, kind of growing, piling up, environmental pollution. Yeah, I started reading reading the ingredients on my shampoo a lot more closely. Because there are, for most of these, options that won't have PFAS. And sometimes you might have to go to an older school, like I mentioned, older school waterproofing, like waxed canvas, which things that need more maintenance and upkeep, basically. Um, you might have to use a sunscreen that needs reapplied more often because long-lasting things tend to, like PFAS make things long-lasting, so lots of long-lasting products have PFAS in them, basically.
Hmm.
But it's something to think about that, like maybe we reapply sunscreen more. Maybe we have to, treat our boots more often because we bought boots that aren't Scotch guarded. So you have to, use other waterproofing things.
You have something from Environmental Working Group.
Mhm.
Um, do they track PFAS in their Skin Deep database? Do you know?
So I don't know if they do in their Skin Deep database. The thing that I used from them was they have made like a searchable kind of usable database of that EPA required monitoring, the UCMR5 monitoring. Yeah. So this is like EPA data.
So I just popped up if you have like a particular product that you love, or you're looking for maybe an alternative, I've gone to Skin Deep on EWG.
Nice. Yeah.
Like, oh, I really love this one. Like, is this bad? Because when you start reading all those chemicals are in the back or whatever, it's like, oh God.
Yeah.
What does this mean? Because sometimes even like some of my natural products, the words are all, I don't have a PhD in biochemistry. So the word, if it's like a scientific name or whatever, it can sound a little gnarly, but it's really just like another name for like aloe or something like that. So
yeah.
Anyways, that's a good resource if you're.
That is really cool. I'm looking.
I kind of remember last time I looked up something it did.
Yeah. That's really cool. I didn't know about that. I have just been looking at despite the biochemistry, I don't know all of the chemical names of the things, but if you see something that has like a fluoro in it, it's like a good sign.
Okay.
So look it up and see if it's a PFAS.
Okay. I'll be heading to my bathroom shortly after this to check all my stuff.
Yeah, but then it's the thing also, like, I feel like every time I learn about something like this, I'm always like, I've got to throw these away and get better stuff. But then it's like still out there, so I don't know. Anyway, just
So with plastic water bottles, are those microplastics or forever chemicals that are coming off of those?
I would, as far as I know, it's just microplastics because the thing about plastic also is that like lots of these products that have forever chemicals in them are like things like if you think about like a pizza box or like a popcorn bag, those are like paper products that they want to contain to make more grease resistant, right? So they've been like PFAS coated. Plastics tend to be already they already have some of the properties that PFAS, like they are less reactive, right? They're already waterproof for the most part. Water bottles, I think the concern is microplastics. I did have also, just this thing about like something else that has been bothering me so much. Is the reality that like about 5% of the plastics we produce are able to be recycled. And the thing that like, I don't know, I just feel like I remember singing this great song about recycling in preschool. I've been like taught my whole life that like recycling is the answer. And really the answer is just to like buy less plastic in the first place. Which is really hard to do. So I did just want to mention this because I think that lots of times, yeah, these concerns about microplastics and PFAS are so parallel. They run very parallel to each other. Anyway, so just wanted to mention that also.
Yeah, I mean, and just an example of like just making different decisions. So like, I was at the store yesterday. I always hit up the clearance aisle. They had a Myers dish soap refill thing. So it was like pretty large. It was like a really, really big size, probably like a gallon of dish soap to refill your regular container or whatever. And it was on clearance. So I was like, it was a really good scent. So I was like, oh God. But then Norman, we have a resupply store. So I was like, well, it might be a little bit more expensive to go refill it at the resupply store, but I won't have to use this plastic container. Like, yes, I'm sort of using less than if I had bought like a bunch of smaller dish soaps, but I also have this other alternative where I use zero plastic. And so I think that's a decision that consumers, if they, again, on all of our programs, we always state the privilege of making some of those types of decisions. Like I am able to spend $1 more to refill it at the resupply where it's in bulk. I just refill my existing container. Their bulk things are all in glass. But I think, again, if we all sort of make decisions differently like that about, what is the amount of plastic that I that I'm purchasing in a daily week or a typical week can make a difference.
Yeah, for sure. I think it is. Yeah, that's we've started buying peanut butter in glass jars, which is more expensive. It took us a long time to be like, oh, I think it's worth it. But yeah, like it is that um yeah, having like if you have the means to do things like that, it is great to exercise your means and your privilege in that way.
So my process has been like spending in a little bit of extra money for this is aligned with my values, and I can do it. I have the ability to do it. So this is aligned with my values. So someone's gonna wrestle that extra dollar out of my hand because this is something that I care about and has consequences. Yeah, but this issue's hard because like I agree with you that like recycling was supposed to be like the big answer and everybody got on board, and like my sister just finally got up like really into recycling this year. Like correctly, like she knows to rinse things and and I want to be excited for her and applaud her evolution, but also I'm like, this is like 30 years too late. Like,
yeah. Yeah.
No longer, this is not the answer. Unfortunately, but reusing, repurposing, we're kind of focusing on that a little bit more.
Yeah. Nice. I do have a last like disjointed section of this PowerPoint, which is the things that I think about in terms of more traditional water conservation, which I think I didn't watch all of well, anyway, I know that you've talked about like sustainable food choices, and things, but basically I always think about water conservation as like, I need to keep my showers short. I need to turn off the faucet while I'm brushing my teeth, which are good things to do. And again, are things that I learned from songs in like preschool. But a couple of years ago, I was talking to a friend who's a hydrologist who was like, you know what? Who is a hydrologist and also a vegan for environmental reasons. Who was basically saying that showers and other like direct personal water use are kind of small potatoes to our like consumer water footprint. So these are water footprints for these consumer goods.
Okay.
And they're a lot, right? Like,
so to make a car, to make leather shoes.
Yes.
To make
Yeah, exactly. And a piece of paper being 5.1 liters is nuts to me. And I guess for reference, a shower is like 17 to 20 gallons. So, a piece of paper isn't a full shower, but a t-shirt is a lot of showers, equivalent. And in terms of food, this is the thing that really got me, and that we think a lot about in my household, is like, a hamburger, not even a cheeseburger, because a cheeseburger adds some more, but a cheeseburger is like 40 showers, which is just sort of horrible to grapple with, because I love a cheeseburger. And obviously there are a lot of economic questions about this too, especially in Oklahoma, where, like a lot of our fellow statespeople like have like livelihoods based on beef, it's tricky. So I don't know. It's just another thing where it's important to weigh the environmental cost of these things.
Yeah, well, just to know, like most people don't know these things, so they can't make a decision because they don't have the information, So when we did do the food episode, I believe I don't have the specific statistics anymore, but poultry and pork used significantly less water than cattle. So that was kind of interesting that even like making that choice, like if you're not a vegetarian or a vegan or whatever, like you can still make some choices that are very different than others.
Right. And then even if you are a vegetarian or a vegan, like beer is a lot less, water intensive than wine. Or like, like there are other choices too in there that aren't meat choices. But yeah, meat is very water intensive or more water intensive than vegetables because you have to water all those vegetables for the animals to eat.
Yes.
And then yeah, so these are just things that I think about a lot. And I think this is the end of, oh, no, 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 no. This is not, I just felt like I hadn't talked enough about things that I've directly reported on. So I did. So this is a water conservation story that I did directly report on, which is um, basically another story about, or another data point for it being important to preempt these problems because the solutions are usually not nearly as effective as preempting them. In Oklahoma City, this is Lake Hefner. I think this is in October of last year. So Lake Hefner got really low. And when Lake Hefner gets really low, the city and the Army Corps of Engineers and people from Canton Lake, which is, I'll show this map, up in northwestern Oklahoma. So Oklahoma City owns water rights to Canton Lake. So when Lake Hefner gets really low like this, 100 miles northwest of there, they open the dam at Canton Lake and let water trickle down the North Canadian River to Oklahoma City to replenish Hefner Lake. And people don't use Canton for drinking water, but it is like a recreational lake that the town gets a lot of its revenue from people going there to like boat and fish and stuff. So it affects the town, even if it's not directly affecting their drinking water. But the thing here is like a lot of water evaporates and like soaks into the ground on its way down. Like, yeah, this is not, I think, working as a peg, but just basically that lots of times it's not avoidable because it's like a drought effect, but conservation can also help us keep our water levels in check down here, so that we don't then have to like lose a bunch of water pulling it from Canton. And I don't know. I feel like that has been a big motivator in my own personal water conservation because I like got to go see this water and be like, oh my gosh, it's like got so far to go before I get to drink it. And we're gonna lose so much of it, and it's like impacting people up here. Um, I don't know. So just something to think about that the like patches are usually are not always the most efficient whenever we're trying to address water scarcity. So it's if we can prevent water scarcity, it's much better. But that is the last of my slides. So
And I was telling you I couldn't do an eco chat about water because I don't know one who's as psychotic about water conservation as I am. So I'll just tack this on. But I will not
should we
waste.
get rid of my slides?
Oh yeah.
Okay. I don't know how to get rid of them. Okay.
I
Cool.
will not waste a drop of water. I will use every drop of water. So, and this has caused friction with relationships and all kinds of stuff. Like if you're waiting for the water to warm up for the shower, I have water bottles next to the sink that I'm filling up with like a very slow drip that we have to wait for. I mean, water gets used for like everything. And I won't just like wash something. So like if my partner wants, he's in charge of the dishes. So I have to just stay away from the whole thing because it drives me nuts. Because he's just like, you got like a real cheesy bowl or whatever, and he's just like putting it right under the water and just like spending 15 minutes under the water, like trying. I'm like, just sit it under there and when you wash your hands, the water goes down into the bowl. Then there's water in the bowl, and then it can soak. And then like an hour, hours later, you can come and then you can use that existing water. Like if I boil eggs, I use the water to like. It's just like I don't let a single drop of water go to waste. I have to clean the litter box for the foster kitty, and it's been a real issue because I can't just like, I'm not just going to go put it under the sink or with a hose and just like spend an hour with water running, like scraping stuff off. Like it's got to be a whole like soaking process. I need to use rain barrel water, like, so I'm on like the really far end of this. And we really try to stress that with all of the like the food stuff with in the landscaping one that we did, obviously switching to a landscape that you don't have to the watering, the constant watering of lawns that don't for plants and grass that doesn't work out here, especially through our summers. Just getting just to have some awareness and stop taking for granted that we just have this like constant stream of water available to us at all times, and that there are no consequences or that's just going to keep going forever. I mean, I think we're all learning that the way of life that we've had for the last 30, 40, 50 years or whatever it just isn't going to work forever. And so we just have to make some small changes that are really easy. I think you're hitting about the PFAS is like a convenience thing. Like they've made our lives more convenient. And I think we all maybe just need to like, where I think there is a spiritual aspect to this, that you're centering on a more spiritual connection to the earth and your priorities and your values and what's important to you. And to let go of the need to just have like things just always convenient the way that they maybe have been or are available, and because there are consequences to all of that, and it's not necessarily serving that spiritual part of our natures. So.
Although I did want to, when you were talking about the dishes, and I learned a couple of years ago that in general, like using the dishwasher, if you have one, is so much more water efficient. And that's like the only thing I feel like one of the few things I've encountered where it's like, listen, the convenience is also the conservation friendly.
Okay, well, I thought that, Graycen. I don't think we covered that on any of our eco chats, but that was a huge fight in my household because I was like determined that the hand washing was better. We listened to a Stuff You Should Know episode of the podcast Stuff You Should Know that said, like, even if you're running it half full, it's still using less water than if you did hand washing. So after we did that episode, I gave up and I said, okay, we're going to start. I've never used a dishwasher in my entire life until last year. We finally gave in, and we've been running the dishwasher. But that's one of those times where it's like, I did fight that one a bit. I do think that it's kind of gross because we don't run it all the time. But I'm just, that's yes.
I was really tickled by that. And it also like, I don't know, I learned that from my husband when we like started dating and cooking together that I don't know, yeah, like he was like, yeah, don't rinse that stuff. And I was like, you foul man. Like what's wrong with you? But yes, that is, it is more water efficient. Although I do question, I wonder about like having seen just because the like footprint, the water footprint of manufacturing things is like very fresh in my mind. It might not be more water efficient if you like count the manufacturing of the dishwasher in there. But if you have one, like if you already have one, it's already there. Might as well.
Yes.
But
the other thing that my maybe most horrifying fact of 2024 was the amount of water that they have to use for AI.
Yes. And I think that the water and the power, I have worked really hard not really hard, but like I've really tried to find ways to turn off the like automatic AI features on everything. They won't let you do it in Gmail. Like they will not, which is or in Google search. So I've been like trying to find alternatives to Google because yes, I think that, and this is not me speaking as a journalist. It's always so hard, like I have to be like, oh, I'm not being objective. Um, but I do think that it's like a solution to a made up problem most of the time. There are really useful uses of AI, but most of the ones that they're trying to market to us are not particularly useful. They
Like,
may be convenient. I don't think most of them are even convenient. I think a lot of them are just for fun. And so it's important to think about the sorry, I like really am I have it's very, very energy and water intensive. And so like I don't know. Anytime I see one that like somebody has made just for a group chat, I say,
yes.
"Would you like?" um,
Yeah.
which
So
is rude, but
well, that's why I
also,
wanted to mention it because I had no idea. I was never into AI to begin with, but like
Mhm,
it just seemed like, oh yeah, it was just pitched. It's pitched as this very fun thing that's great or whatever.
mhm.
And then when I learned about the water thing, I was like, oh my gosh, like
Yeah,
I just don't
that's
think
why.
people know. If people knew about it,
Mhm.
maybe they would,
Yeah,
like,
and just the inability to opt out of it has really been like I've been a big Google products user for a long time and have been really like my New Year's resolution this year was sort of to shift away from using services that like where I couldn't opt out of AI. And it's been really challenging to find alternatives that are as good. And I haven't in most cases yet, but I've got all year. So but yeah, I worry about that a lot too. And there's a lot of yeah, I think a lot of moves to bring, I mean, they announced data centers in Oklahoma for the Trump administration announced funding for data centers that would go into Oklahoma and be used um for like specifically for AI purposes. And just like there are a lot of problems or like I've been doing a lot of reporting on transmission like protests to new transmission line projects and people are protesting clean energy projects, which is like a whole other can of worms, but we are ramping up our energy use so much, not just like we are using more energy as like regular people, but then on top of that, like because of how like this huge jump in AI usage, like I don't know, there's a lot more need for electrical infrastructure, and you see people who are opposed to the infrastructure, but not I'm really trying to be, they're trying not to break my journalistic kayfabe. But like we are using more energy and opposition to the infrastructure does not change the fact that there's so much more demand for energy coming from these things, you know. That's it.
mm.
Uh, so
Okay, one last question.
yeah.
Uh, is there, when I was having some insomnia and I had a podcast on in the middle of the night and I was drifting off and a commercial came on and the host was talking about a filtration system for your water that does remove forever chemicals. And I was sort of jolted awake because I was like, oh God, I have to worry about forever chemicals in my water. And I fell asleep again. Is
Mhm.
there an actual filter that can get rid of forever chemicals, like that you could put on your faucet or something?
I'm not aware of a like single home filter that can do that. But that doesn't mean there isn't one. I am just not aware of it. I know that there have been some studies of large scale filtration systems for like public water supplies, that have been able to remove them. I know that there are people who are working on this problem, but I'm not aware of
Okay.
a single home
Okay.
one, but I just maybe am behind. So
Well, thank you so much for doing this. I know you're very busy and that this is a wild time, but we really appreciate you taking the time to share with
thank you
us.
for having me. It was really great to talk with you.
You too. Okay. Thank you.